Proportional Response, Book 1, Chapter 8, Part 1, Blurring Lines. Hannibal dragged himself into the council chamber and put on his best face. The 2 days since Henry's latest big reveal had been exhausting, and he'd gotten half the sleep he should have in that time, but he could not afford to look exhausted now. He looked down at Henry with envy. He knew for a fact that the man had gotten less than a third the sleep he should have the last 2 days, but nothing about his demeanor showed it, though he was pretty sure the man wore some makeup. The door slammed shut behind him, but he couldn't muster the energy to be startled. He'd spent hours viewing Henry's non-stop meetings with every ambassador who seemed sympathetic to the humans' ideas, or heavily antagonistic to the Sultan's. He'd spent more hours providing commentary to Henry and Her Majesty on those meetings, as well as meetings of his own with ambassadors who were not Sultan sycophants, but also not sympathetic to the humans, and then providing commentary on those meetings. Now, after all of that, he not only had to be able to perform, but perform at his best. Prime Minister Kilintar took the stage and put a grim look on his face. He played his part well, and Hannibal might have believed it if he hadn't taken note of the childlike glee with which the man had watched them all enter the council chambers. Kilintar leaned with both hands on his podium. Ambassadors of the council, I have called this special session, as required by law, to notify that there has been an action taken by an old machine. He held up a placating hand as irritated murmurs spread through the chamber by ambassadors who had been rousted from their beds. No, ambassadors, I will not be opening the floor now, and yes, I have good reason for this. This was not a routine sighting, nor the sort of action we have ever seen them take in the past. No, this old machine, on the provocation of the human force, brazenly defying council orders, destroyed an entire fleet of Sultan ships sent to dissuade the humans from preventing this council's attempts to keep us all safe from Deathworld marauders. Further, the humans have blatantly and knowingly flaunted the law even more by failing to even file a report of an old machine sighting. We have been able to confirm that one of their ships was able to send a coded message after the old machine ended the battle, and that was 2 days ago. He dramatically pointed down at Henry, sighting down his arm as if it were a rifle. The humans have refused to abide by a public, open general operating order of this council. Henry held both of his hands up and looked completely abashed. If Hannibal didn't know for a fact that the man was lying, he'd have been inclined to believe the act. He did a quick look around the chambers and was able to separate everyone into 2 groups: those who believed Henry's act and those who knew the truth, but pretended to believe him. Even the staunchest supporters of the Sultans appeared taken in. Thankfully, Kilintar didn't notice. He was far too caught up in his drama as he continued. I do not know what scheme you are hatching, Ambassador, but this council has had enough. I call for a vote of censure extremists against the human race. They have proven, time and again, that they have nothing but contempt for this league, for its laws, and for this ruling council. Their articles of inclusion to the league will be rescinded, their embassy expelled from the council world, and they will be made a vassal state under the care of the Slar, until such time as they can prove that they have given up their Deathworld ways and intend to become productive, positive members of the League. Do I have a second? Kilintar slammed down his hand on his podium, and Hannibal noticed that his own mic had gone live. Before he could even take a breath, the Findle ambassador signaled a second in the call for a vote, her birdsong voice carrying through the chamber, leaving only a third to bring a vote to the council. He could hear Henry's voice shouting protests and attempting to force a point of order even from the other side of the council chamber, but Kilintar ignored him. In a flash of insight, he discerned Kilintar's plan. He'd obviously prepped 2 ambassadors to speak immediately after he'd called for a second, in the hopes that the other ambassadors, all having been just roused from their beds, would not react quickly enough. The plan would have worked too, except it seemed someone had prepared himself well. The Arabso ambassador spoke at the same time as the Quilcotha ambassador tried to third the call for a vote. Quilcotha don't even think that fast, much less move that fast, and they aren't willingly allied with the Outson. There is a threat in having the Quilcotha be the one to provide the third. The Arabso's voice came through louder, however. I object. A vote of this magnitude requires deliberation,
and requires allowing the accused to give defense.
Time to play my part.
Of course you object. The Arabso have become extremely close to the humans, economically, politically, and militarily. Don't look so surprised, Ambassador.
Enable breathed an inward sigh of relief that the man had managed to respond appropriately.
The Venta Empire shares a border with you and another with the humans, and your race is known for, shall we say, military adventurism. Do you really think we wouldn't notice when you and the humans began to become so close?
The Arabso ambassador puffed himself up and prepared to respond, but the Thermican responded instead, right on cue.
Really, Ambassador Enable? You would have the vote proceed without even giving the humans a chance to speak.
Enable held up a hand to stop the man, who pretended to ruffle his feathers in response, but motioned to yield the floor. Enable fought to keep his voice in perfect tune.
Not at all, not at all. I just wish to point out that such an objection coming from someone so close to the humans seemed convenient. That said, the esteemed Arabso ambassador and the illustrious Thermican have a valid point. The law and the letter demand that he at least be allowed to speak.
Enable wanted to laugh at Kilintar's grip on his podium. He thought he wasn't displaying his fury at being thwarted, but any practiced eye could see it. Then Enable felt his heart stop as Kilintar smiled, stood straight, and nodded. His voice came out surprisingly neutral.
Very well. I had hoped to keep this brief and allow all of you to get back to your beds. But if the esteemed members of this council wish to drag these matters out, then by all means, let us do so. I have the Supreme Commander of the Escort sent to X-2652.
The Arabso ambassador interrupted.
Vintus. The world is called Vintus by its inhabitants.
Kilintar rolled his eyes.
The Supreme Commander, who was sent to X-2652, which has not been given a name by any civilized species, has made himself available to give testimony to this council. Supreme Commander, please detail, in brief, the events which occurred 2 days ago.
A large hologram of the Zoltan's head had appeared between the council booths and the Prime Minister's podium. He looked across the council, sneered at Henry, and began to speak. But the Arabso ambassador spoke first.
Supreme Commander, welcome to the council. I recognize you, and know that you have had the honor of testifying before this council before. I would remind you that your testimony is being recorded, and you must now consider yourself to be under oath to tell the truth, and only the truth as best as you are able. This should not be necessary, but the law and the letter demand that you be reminded.
The commander's eyes narrowed at the Arabso, and Enable feared for the man's safety. The Zoltan nodded before he spoke.
I will take your comments as a reminder of the law and the letter, and not as a comment on my honor. Now, to the matter at hand. I was dispatched with a protective task force to escort the initial Kenfistration survey team. Upon arrival in the star system, I contacted the commander of the humans occupying force and informed him that we had no desire to fight, nor to dislodge their force, but that we would be escorting our scientists on their peaceful mission to perform their duty. The human responded with threats and the sort of base insults one would expect from an uncultured death welder. I attempted to keep the man calm and explain the situation, but he cut the contact just as we returned to sublight speed. It took only a few moments for me to learn why. The entire human fleet, which outnumbered and outmassed my sizable task force by 2 to 1, had been blanketing space with projectile fire the entire time we had been talking.
As the Zoltan talked, Enable's console beeped, and he checked the display. It took effort to keep the amusement off of his face. The Zoltans had sent a report of the ships on both sides involved in the battle. They had doubled the human ship's actual numbers and claimed that a small civilian ship, which never existed, had been at the center of their fleet. The Zoltan continued. We do not know how much fire the humans set loose into the void. Thankfully, it was close to a star, so most of it will probably be claimed by one gravity well or another fairly soon. This initial, unprovoked surprise salvo crippled many ships in my fleet and destroyed the civilian transport carrying several prize scientists. My men responded valiantly and attempted to return fire, but had to act with exceeding caution because of the habitable world the humans had placed at their backs. We had to close, under waves of relentless space blanketing fire, to a range where we could be sure of our firing solutions. I lost many more ships and their men
to the merciless human assault. Some men from doomed ships tried to make for escape pods, but those pods were quickly torn to shreds by the indiscriminate scatter of human ordnance.
The Zoltan paused to look at the room and seemed to sense something was wrong. Inibal had settled himself in to wait through an hours-long rendition of the fictional account of the battle. But then, he saw the man realize he'd lost the room and decide to end his testimony.
The battle was fierce. Ambassadors and the humans fought, well, like Deathworlders. I broadcast several times an intention to end the fighting and let both parties withdraw. The men under my command battled with courage and conviction. Though outnumbered, our prowess and technological advantage began to turn the tide as we closed, and we finally managed to inflict casualties on the cowardly human. At last, we came within range, and I was able to fire the main cannon of my flagship. It took time to develop the firing solution so that we could fire, and even more time when we double-checked the solution, just to be sure, but I finally had a chance to end the bloodshed, so I took it. I will submit to this council that I acted in the best interests of all parties in taking that shot. The humans do not fight well without their leaders. Oh, no, ambassadors, it is true. I am a taxation of the Fourth Order, a decorated veteran of many conflicts, some of them against the humans, and have studied the humans extensively. They have a quaint phrase about warfare. Cut off the head and the body dies. You see, only a small few of them have the sort of intelligence and capabilities that we expect of our average citizens. The rest tend to blindly follow their leaders and will often lay down their arms if the leaders who drive them fall silent.
Yes.
Many of you seem to be wondering why I have digressed into the topic of human psychology. I remind the Council of all of these things because I am shamed and must bear my shame before you. I erred in taking that shot, and in doing so, I brought the wrath of the old machines down upon my fleet. The round had barely left my ship when an old machine appeared on our screens. It did not appear to travel into the system. My best estimate is that it had been sitting there watching the entire battle. As soon as it appeared, ships began to disappear from our scanners, and the projectile disappeared as well. Soon my own ship began to fall apart around me, and I found myself floating in space. I was drawn toward the old machine, then lost consciousness, and woke on Olmakar with the survivors of my fleet.